How is everyone? That's good. Well, welcome back to part 2 of our presentation on Daniel 11, Greece and the time of the end. The first presentation we did yesterday was on Greece and the deadly wound. And we basically looked at verses 5 to verses 9 and saw how the historical fulfillment of this prophecy was a type of another prophecy yet future to its time, which demonstrated how history repeats. So what we're going to do is we're going to pray, and we'll do a quick summary, brief summary of yesterday, and we'll continue in verse 10, which is where we left off. So if you want to join me for a word of prayer. In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Dear Father in heaven, we ask that you will draw us near to the cross through your word. Promise that your word would sanctify us and cleanse us from all sin. Keep us now as we go through your word. Apply that water to our hearts and our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So by way of a summary, we saw that Greece, the kingdom of Greece, begins in verse 3 and 4. We covered that history yesterday, and we saw by the time we reached verse 5, it went from 4 generals to 2. And anyone remember how it went to 2? The prince. Remember the prince? What did he have to take? Yes, Elijah. How many territories?
3.
He took 3 territories. His first, which was the east, Seleucus. This is his area here. And he gained that in 301. That's his first territory. His second territory was in 286. He took over Cassander, literally fought with him and took this area that was in the west. And by 281, he took out Lysimachus, and that was his third and final territory, which began his dominion or reign, which is described in verse 5. It says that he would have a great dominion, which is all of this period here. He's in dominion. And verse 7 tells us that this dominion ended when the king of the south came on the scene. And that was Ptolemy. You see a list of kings just to your my left, your right, and it was Ptolemy Euergetes. Just point to him there. In 246, he travelled up from Egypt as a king of the south. This is verse 7, in fulfillment of verse 7, and he attacked the king of the north and brought his dominion to an end. Verse 7. So his reign begins in verse 5, king of the north, and it ends by verse 7. And this is his years of dominion. And we saw when you take 281 from 246, it left us with 35 years. That's how long his reign was. It took 3 territories to get there. And just before he ended, verse 6, and in the end of years, so as it was ending this period, verse 6, that's how it begins, in the end of years, there was a peace agreement between King of the South and the King of the North. Everyone understand that? Was that simple summary? So then we saw that this history had happened again, yet future. And we saw In Daniel 7 verse 8, another king of the north, described in Daniel 11 verse 40, part A, he takes 3 territories. It says 3 horns were plucked up by the roots. And that dominion begins when he's taken the 3rd territory. And that happened by 538. And then this dominion lasted a long time. It was a great dominion, as it says in verse 5, in paralleling. And it ended in 1798, when again, King of the South, which this time was revolutionary France, came against the papacy, who was the King of the North. So King of the South brings down King of the North here, and King of the South brings down King of the North here. And just before both times when the King of the North's reign ends, we saw that there was a peace agreement just before. So here it was in 252, and it's between King of the South and King of the North, this peace agreement. You can see that in verse 6. For the king's daughter shall come to the King of the North to make an agreement. That's what the verse says. And you can also see that in 1797. In fact, Wikipedia, you just type in Treaty of Tolentino, which we talked about yesterday, 1797, and it summarizes it, and it says this was a treaty between revolutionary France and the papacy. Just summarizes it for you. It's a peace agreement. So they're both exactly the same. And we saw that this King of the North reigned for 3.5 years, and this one reigned for 35 years. So there was a similarity in the history. Both in this history, verse 5 to 9, and also in this history from 538 to 1798. So, rubber, tissue. We'll continue now in verse 10.
So shall we turn to Daniel 11 verse 10? Daniel 11 verse 10. Summary.
Yes, please.
But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come, and shall overflow and pass through.
Verse 11. And the king of the south shall be...
Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortune.
Verse 11. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand.
Verse 12. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000, but he shall not be strengthened by it.
Verse 13. For the king of the north shall return, and he shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years.
With a great multitude,
Great army.
And with much riches. Verse 14. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall.
Amen. True.
Verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand.
Verse 16. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his will. And upright ones... Sorry?
And none shall stand.
Oh, and none shall stand before him, and upright ones with him. And he shall stand in the glorious land. I'm in verse 17. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. Verse 17. He shall set his face. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her. But she shall not stand on his side, neither before him.
Verse 18. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him.
Verse 19. Then shall he set his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found.
Verse 20, the first part of verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. So let's go to verse 10. We've taken up where we left off yesterday. We left off at verse 9. So let's go to verse 10 now. And let's see if we can understand what verse 10 is telling us. So it says but. That's the first word, but. What does but mean? An opposite. But means the opposite. But means it's connected to what's just been said, but it's something opposite. So I might say, I like red, but I don't want a red apple. I like red, I don't want red. So it's an opposite. So in verse 7 to 9, we saw that the king of the south, which was Ptolemy Euergetes, he came against the king of the north, who was Seleucus Callinicus at that time, and he was the fourth king of the northern kingdom. He was the fourth king of the north, and he went down. And the king of the north was taken down, and he lost his dominion at that time. Now it's saying but, so we're expecting to see something connected but opposite. So if we're expecting to see something opposite, and it says but his sons, whose sons do you think are going to be stirred up in this verse? If it's something opposite to what took place when Ptolemy came against Seleucus. Which king?
King of the north.
So which king would... You're saying king of the south is maybe but his sons?
No, the king of the north.
Some were saying king of the north, some were saying king of the south. Okay, so king of the north in verse 7 to 9. So an opposite would be the north coming against the south. So let's see whether this verse is talking about north coming against the south. So it says, but his sons. Did Seleucus Callinicus have any sons?
2.
And the answer is
Seleucus,
yes. Someone has said 2.
Tyrannus and Antiochus Magnus.
And thank you for the names. So one was Seleucus Tyrannus, and one was Antiochus Magnus, which means Antiochus the Great. I didn't write Magnus, but it means the Great. So Seleucus had 2 sons, and they did get stirred up, and they did come or attack the south. In fact, one of them attacked the south. Just as the verse says, one shall certainly come and shall overflow and pass through. What does it mean to overflow? Where's Asha? Can I use you, Asha? Asha's going to hold a cup for us. Elijah, what does it mean to overflow?
When you put too much in it and then it goes out.
Oh, okay. So what does it go out of?
It comes out of the thing it's being poured in.
So it goes out of where it's supposed to be. Where does it go out?
From the top.
Yeah.
When?
Ooh, you see that? Okay, so we know what overflow it means. That means overflow. And children, can you think of a verse in the Bible where it talks about a cup overflowing? Psalms 23 says, my cup runneth over, or my cup overflows. So that's positive, but this one is going to be a negative. Now, we're in a great controversy, and what Satan does is he always does opposites. He does opposite to what God is doing. So anyway, so this power here is going to be overflowing and passing through another country. So let me explain this in what happened in history. Seleucus Tyrannus got together an army. It says he would assemble a multitude, a great multitude. He got an army together, but he died in 222. People didn't like him, and they killed him, and he died. So his brother, Antiochus Magnus, took the throne in 222, and he continued getting this army together. So they both assembled the multitude, just like the verse says. It says, his sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble a great multitude. So they both assembled it, but it was only Antiochus Magnus who actually attacked. So it says, one
And more
shall
capable.
certainly come and shall overflow and pass through. And when you overflow, it's always from up down. So the king of the north, he had his area, but he was no longer in dominion. And all this area that they were fighting over always, you see red and green there because they were always fighting over this area, Syria, where Jerusalem was. Well, he decided, that Antiochus Magnus, that didn't like what the king of the south had done to his father. So he's going to come into the king of the south's territory. The king of the south had taken that territory back for himself. And the king of the north decided, I'm going to take this territory back. So he overflowed where he was supposed to be. Like, let's say that was his cup. He decides to come down here now, overflowing. So he overflows and he takes back some territory that used to belong to him. So he comes in here and he takes it back. I'm just going to say, takes back territory. And this began in the year 219. So 219 BC, he takes back some territory. Now, there is a pause in how he takes back the territory, because it says, then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. So he starts taking territory, he stops for a while, he gets a bit stopped by the southern power, and then he pretty much finishes taking all of this area and he goes right up to the border of Egypt itself. So he takes all this territory back and goes right up to the border. So that's why he would be stirred up even to his fortress. It didn't say in his fortress, it's up to it. So he goes up to his fortress. And this is where the capital was, Alexandria. And we're going to see in the next verse what the king of the south did because of it. But before we go on to the next verse, let's see whether anywhere else in Daniel 11 it speaks about overflowing and passing through. Can you think of a verse? Daniel 11 that speaks about the king of the north, who in verse 10 was Antiochus Magnus, but somewhere else in Daniel 11 where the king of the north overflows and passes through.
40.
Yeah. So Daniel 11 verse 40, the second half, says that the king of the north would would come against him with an army, with chariots, horsemen, that's an army, with many ships. And it also says he would overflow and pass over. Now it's the same word, pass through, which is the same Hebrew word for pass over. So it's using the same language. So you have the king of the north in verse 10, and you have the king of the north in verse 40, and both of them are overflowing and passing through. So let's see what parallels we can take from verse 10, when the king of the north passes through, and verse 40b. How many sons assembled an army in verse 10? 2. Now, who was the army of the king of the north in verse 40b?
America.
America. America was the army. Now, can you remind us what event this was? Someone said America, so what event was this?
Berlin.
So this was the bringing down of communism in Europe. The Berlin Wall was like a token of the Soviet Union coming down.
Of the Eastern Bloc.
Yeah, of the Eastern Bloc. So I'm going to say America was the army. So the Pope met with a particular president when they were devising this plan of how to bring down Soviet communism. And when they met, which president met with the Pope?
Right.
Yeah?
Obama.
Ooh, it wasn't Obama, it was a bit before Obama.
Reagan.
So Reagan met with the Pope. So and he was getting together an army Pretty much he was saying, we will help you. We will be your military force. We will be your monetary support. So Reagan decides he's going to be the military support. But who was the president when the Berlin Wall actually fell?
When did the bomb?
And when did the Berlin Wall fall?
1989.
1989. I've not written the date here. And who was the president of America when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989? Yeah, it was Bush Sr. So you had two presidents working alongside the papacy to bring down Soviet communism in 1989. And what happened was, the Soviet communism began, don't have it on, but it began in Russia, the Soviet communism. And what they did was, when Reagan and Bush used their army to help the papacy to bring it down, they didn't actually take down Soviet communism altogether. They took down the territories that papacy used to own. So just as the King of the North in verse 10 just took back some of his territories in verse 10 when he overflowed and passed through, so in 1989, when America was being the army for the papacy, it only actually took back territory that the papacy used to own. And most of those countries became quite Catholic after it went down.
Why do you say they used army? Why do you say they used army? Because
So the Bible says that they came with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. So part of their strategy was to use military force, or the threat of it, as well as using financial, it's
I
almost
think
like
it
a
was more-
push and bribery.
it was more the political.
So that happened in 1989, and it parallels the overflowing and the passing through of verse 10. So,
It was more than political, because at that time you had the Star Wars project. So Reagan was basically there was a military race. So what the USA
But it was not like an actual war.
no, but the
Cold
point
War.
It was a cold war.
it was a
yeah.
Cold War.
So
but-
it by still a lot political, you know.
yeah, but what America was doing, it was like an arms race. So by doing the Star Wars project, then Russia was becoming
It
bankrupt.
was a competition.
Militarily, yeah. So militarily they were becoming bankrupt. So it holds on verse
so
14.
I'll just go back into the history of verse 10, and maybe hopefully this will clarify it a little bit more as well. In verse 10, when the King of the North overflowed and passed through, he actually didn't always use his army. So there were some territories, you just search him in Google, Antiochus the Great, in the year 219 and onwards, and how he took back his territory. Sometimes he would just go to an area, some of these cities, and they would just say, we want to be on your side, we want to be freed, we don't like what this Ptolemy has done in subjugating us, we want to be on your side. And there was actually a general who owned quite a large amount of territory for the South power,
changed sides.
and he just changed sides, and he said, I'll just come on your side now. So in the language of overflowing and passing through, it doesn't mean that it was always military that was doing this taking back of the territory, even though there was some military behind it.
5 years later, in 1994, the papacy called the Tutsis in Rwanda leaning towards communism. They're still using the phrase communism when they exterminated 800,000 Tutsis. And just recently supposedly
So it's
apologised.
important to remember that in 1989, it wasn't completely communism that was taken out completely. Just as in verse 10, the king of the south wasn't taken out completely. It says he was stirred up even to his fortress. So he went right up to his border, and he didn't take him out completely. He just took back some territory that once was his, and that was territory that was taken in verse 7 and 9 when Ptolemy had taken Callinicus.
So one of the main places that the north had before was called Syria. So this was also known in history as the Fourth Syrian War, 219, beginning from 219, when the king of the north overflows and passes over. And the king of the north used to have called Syria. At that time in 219, it was the king of the south had possession of it. So the king of the north came in, took whole Syria back. Do you follow? That's one example of one of the places that he came in and reclaimed, but it was his before. And so too, when you see some of these European countries in this period of time, some of the countries before used to be papal, they used to be Catholic in their religion. But when the papacy comes in at this time frame, when communism had taken over, some of them countries are reclaimed and returned back to the papacy, but in Catholicism. So that's an example of that. So here in summary we have the two sons in verse 10 at the time of the end, and here we have two, which is the army of the king of the north being the papacy, who also come back against the king of the south. So here we see a parallel. Let's go on to see if there's any other parallels, because we have so far done 5 now to verse 10, and we're continuing on. But we've seen now all of verse 40, part A, with the king of the south pushing at the king of the north, and part B, with the king of the north retaliating and coming back. We see all of verse 40 has been re-fulfilled or repeated in this history here. So what's after verse 40? If things should continue to go as they are, what's the next verse after verse 40 in Daniel 11?
41.
Verse 41. And what does it say in verse 41?
You shall enter also into
Shall enter also into the glorious land. So this is the same king of the north power, but now he's entering into the glorious land. So the question is, do we have, what is this a description of? Or do we have, if we go back into history, in the beginning of Daniel chapter 11, do we have a power that enters also into the glorious land after verse 10?
Yeah, the Romans.
Okay, so verse 16, I think some people are quoting, so I'm just going to write verse 16 here. We'll mention Rome. How do we know it's Rome? Verse 3, how does verse 3 introduce the Grecian kingdom? What does he do according to?
His will.
It says he does according to his
will.
will. That's how it introduces. That's the beginning of the Grecian kingdom. When is this phrase next used? Between verse 3 and the rest of Daniel 11. When's it next used? Verse 16. Go on, we're already there. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his will. That tells you, that's a clue, without knowing all the other information, that this is the next kingdom being introduced and on the scene. So, what kingdom came after Greece? Daniel 2? After Greece, simple, Daniel 2. What's the next kingdom? Pagan Rome, yeah, Rome. So this next kingdom that does according to his will, first it was Greece in verse 3, and now in verse 16 we have another power being introduced. Now note that point, introduced, because the history of Greece has not yet finished. By verse 16, this area here is under attack. Glorious land being Jerusalem, Palestine is under attack. But this area, and this area has already been taken, this area is under attack, but this area remains intact, which is Ptolemy, King of the South, and Greece. So the Grecian kingdom, and this is an important point, has not yet finished. But another power is being, what did I say? Introduced. Yeah? And we know it's introduced 2 verses earlier. It's also mentioned, I'm picking up on verse 16. So, this next kingdom being Rome. Who was the general who fulfilled this? Who stood in the glorious land? Does anyone recall? Yes, his name was Pompey. I'm just going to delineate history a moment. What happens when the King of the North in verse 41 enters into the glorious land? It says, many shall So one of the things, many, and you can see countries is a supplied word because it's the people within the countries. It's the many, these many are people. Many are overthrown. I will go on to see that this is a specific group of people because when you're in the glorious land or in Jerusalem, who are you going to find there?
Jews.
You're going to find Jews. You're going to find God's people. It's not just any people in the past. But now we're looking at, I'll just put here verse 41, and we're going to compare it with verse 16. These are the two times where Rome, this one's pagan Rome. I'm just going to put Rome 1. And this one's papal Rome. I'm just going to put Rome 2. But both being Rome and both entering into the glorious land. So there must be some similarities between here and here because the symbols used are parallel. Rome, Rome. Here, many are overthrown. What did it say in verse 16? Once the powers entered, what does it do? What does his hand do? In verse 16, apologies, I know I'm jumping back and forth between verse 41 and 16. In verse 16, when it enters into the glorious land or stands in the glorious land, it says, which by his hand, that's the hand of Rome, the glorious land is what?
Consumed.
So there's some sort of when you consume your food, you eat it and it's gone. There's a destruction of it. And here, many are overthrown, and when you go into overthrown, you can see it's often referred to as a destruction. Is there any other similarities that you can see in this language?
I think we placed the hand on something.
Okay. Yeah.
The hand icon in the chart.
Okay. So someone mentioned something to do with a Sunday law. Something to do with the Sabbath. There's some sort of Sabbath issue at the end of the world. When the papacy enters into the glorious land, there's a Sabbath issue. There's a Sunday law. Yeah. So we're going to look to see, was there anything to do with Sabbath in this history? When was it? Who was it? Did anyone know? No. In this history, verse 16, who's the general? Pompey. Anyone remember the year? It's in 63 BC. In 63 BC, Pompey marched into Jerusalem. There was a division in the camp.
Try to go in there.
There was division in the camp, and there was two specific people. One was called Aristobulus, and one was called Hyrcanus, and they were both due to be heirs to the kingdom of Israel or Jerusalem, and they're both fighting who's going to have this position. And Pompey, who is almost like the chief commander of that time and in authority, he says, I will resolve the dispute. So Rome steps in to help God's people because they're having a dispute, they're arguing amongst themselves. And when he does this, one of the gentlemen, I shouldn't say gentleman, but one of the guys, Aristobulus, he anticipates that Pompey's not going to side with him. So what do you think he does?
He
tries to rebel. So he thinks he's not going to make me king, he's not going to make me the ruler, and so he seeks to make war with Pompey. So it was God's people who brought the destruction upon themselves.
Did he actually go out to meet him and then change his mind?
So in this process, Aristobulus, in the attempt to make war, he then retracts, but all his followers don't retract. And Pompey comes up to the city of Jerusalem. He marches all the way to Jerusalem. Says, "Okay, are you ready to give in?" And what do you think the God's people say? No. They go into the city, which obviously has got big, massive, huge walls, and they say, "We're going to fight you." And Pompey says, "Don't do it. Just come peaceably." And they said, "We're going to fight you." And because there was division in the camp, Hyrcanus' followers were also within the walls. So what do you think they did? When the walls were closed and the gates were closed, and the people, the Rome couldn't get in, what do you think within the camp? What do you think?
They start to fight each other.
They start to fight each other, but Hyrcanus and his followers opened the gate for Pompey and said, get them. There they are, get them.
Judas.
And so Pompey just walked right in. We're told that we've got more to fear from within
Then we have from without.
than we have from without. Pompey walked right in, but there was a double fall, or there was the actual temple. So within the walls, there was the actual temple. This door is a door within Jerusalem, which also had big, massive, thick walls that, again, you could retreat into. And so Aristobulus and his followers, I should say, all retreated into this area, and there was no Hyrcanus and his followers, and they said, we're going to fight from here. And when you read the historic accounts, Josephus and a lot of them, they could have lasted months and months and months and months and months in there without food. It was so secure, it was a fortress, even in that smaller area. But were they doing the will of God?
No.
No, they were in apostasy. And when we're in apostasy, God allows judgments to come upon them. So you see, this typifies a judgment that God allowed to take place on his people because of turning away from the truth. So Pompey, he sieges them. 63 BC, he does a 3-month siege. I'm just going to write 3-month siege. By the way, talking about judgment, in the everlasting gospel, what step is judgment?
Third.
Third, number 3. There's a 3-month siege. Sin, righteousness, judgment. It was the third step, third and final appeal, third angel's message, judgment. So in this siege, during the 3 months, Pompey learns. What do you think he learns about? Pompey gets reports every Sabbath. They congregate together and they do divine worship and service, and they sing and they do sacrifices. So he uses this. You can go to the writings of Josiah Litch. That's where I first saw this account, where it's everywhere. Pompey learned that every Sabbath they were inactive, they wouldn't do anything in terms of defense. So every Sabbath, what he did, he wouldn't attack. So he used some tactics. I won't attack you on the Sabbath, but what he did, he closed in. So if you imagine this is the wall, and there was lots of water around, by the way. Every Sabbath, what he did is he put more dirt, and he was filling up, I don't know how many miles of water it was. It was deep. But every Sabbath, he got his men to fill every Sabbath, and because there was no stones or nothing coming back, they could freely on the Sabbath advance in their attack. So every Sabbath they advanced, Sabbath by Sabbath. In fact, Josiah says, but for the Sabbath, that destruction wouldn't have came upon them. But we will see here it was because they're their own fault, not God's, because it was doing apostasy. So Sabbath by Sabbath they advanced, and then one Sabbath day, what do you think? Where do you think they were? They got to the walls, and there was a big battle engine ram, and they just made a big breach in the walls. In fact, I can read it for you. It says, this is the Jewish encyclopedia. I'm just going to read. When do you think the attack happened in fulfillment of verse 16? What day do you think it took place on?
Sabbath.
On the Sabbath. Jewish encyclopedia, you just type it in. On a Sabbath, I'm just reading word for word, when the Jews were not defending the walls, Josephus calls the day of the fall of Jerusalem. The what? Fall of Jerusalem. This is significant, this event of when God's people fall or are overthrown. The day of the fast, which regarded the Sabbath as a fast day, on a Kronos day, this term likewise denoting the Sabbath. On the day of attack, that is the Sabbath, a breach was made in the wall. Do we see a breach being made in the wall in any of the prophecies of the book of Isaiah that's connected with the Sabbath? Isaiah 58. So on the Sabbath, they also made a breach in the wall, showing you it's significant to do with the Sabbath. And then they entered in through the breach. And what do you think happened? The people were slaughtered. Now almost every historian agrees and estimate this amount of people, so I'm going to put great slaughter. How many people do you think were slaughtered, roughly, from the historians' accounts? Anyone got anything? Anyone got an internet?
12,000.
12,000. I heard someone say 12,000. You can see it anywhere. It's almost in every account. About 12,000 were slaughtered. And in fact, many, it says, even committed suicide. That shows you the spirit of God's people. It says, while they were in the midst of divine service, the Romans entered in and slaughtered heads, blood shed everywhere. And about 12,000 were slaughtered. And isn't it interesting? Where do we see the number 12,000 in Revelation? Revelation 7. And what's the chapter or the subject of Revelation 7?
144,000.
Is there a group by the Sunday law who are received the seal of God that's connected with the number 12,000?
Yeah.
It says there was 12,000 sealed from this tribe and 12,000 sealed from that tribe and 12,000 sealed from this tribe, and the total number is
144,000.
So here we see a lot of parallels with verse 16 when the Rome enters into the glorious land the first time and when Rome enters into the glorious land the second time. And this verse 41 is yet future for us. So if we are trying to understand what's going to happen for us in verse 41, what do we need to do? Go back and understand this history, because as we saw in Ecclesiastes 1:9, history repeats. There's going to be a great slaughter. Many of God's people will be overthrown, and this will be a representation of the close of probation for God's people. 5 testimonies,
Church militant dies.
2:16.
Church triumphant lives.
And I say final close of probation for God's people, because everything is progressive. It says, when the decree goes forth and the stamp is impressed, their characters will remain pure and spotless for eternity. That's the seal of God. So here we see that there is direct parallels of verse 16 and verse 41.
So verse 17 continues the history. Let's read verse 17 to 18. Verse 17 says, someone can read it.
He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. That shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her. But she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him.
Okay, so let's see if we can understand this verse. He shall also set his face. What does the word also mean? Yes?
If someone's already done something, but then another person does it.
Well, you could have somebody else doing the same thing, that would be also, or you could have the same person doing something additional. That's added on. So it says, he shall also. So it's the same he shall also. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom. What is this talking about? Now there's only one other phrase in the Bible, one other place in the Bible that uses the same phrase that says he shall set his face to enter. Or set your face to enter. That phrase, set your face to enter. It's in Jeremiah 42 verse 15. And we're going to see where they enter in Jeremiah 42. In Jeremiah 42 it says, if you wholly set your faces to enter into Egypt, verse 16 says, you shall die. That's Jeremiah 42:15. And it says, if you wholly set your faces to enter into Egypt, verse 16 says, you shall die. Verse 17 says, so it shall be with all the men that set their faces to go into Egypt. It's the same phrase used here in Jeremiah 42. Now, the wording can be a little confusing at first when it says, Jeremiah 42, verse 15. So going back to Daniel chapter 11, verse 17, where it's talking about he, the same he, and he's also doing something else. when it says he shall also set his face to enter, we've just seen that the only time in the Bible when it says they set their face to enter is Egypt. So we're going to now look into verse 17 and see whether this is also Egypt. Okay? So verse 17, it says he shall enter with the strength of his kingdom. It's actually two different he's. So when it says his kingdom, it's actually someone else's kingdom. And you see that because later in the verse it says he shall give him the daughter of women. So you wouldn't give yourself the daughter of women. But later in the verse, because it's got two he's, he shall give him the daughter of women. It's talking about the same he's in the first part of the verse, where it says he shall set his face to enter with the strength of his kingdom. So he's going into someone else's kingdom, whole kingdom it says. So let's just go back into history. We have two kingdoms. You have the king of the north and you have the king of the south. Now in verse 16, the king of the north has now become Rome. Rome took it. It said he came against him. Do you remember that? He did according to his will. So the king of the north is Rome in verse 16, the beginning of verse 16. Second half of verse 16, Rome also has taken Jerusalem. So now when you come into verse 17, what's left of the kingdom of Greece for Rome to take? What's left over? It is Egypt. So the only part that's left was the kingdom of the south, which was Egypt. So the rest of this whole kingdom of Greece is Egypt. And remember we read in Jeremiah 42 verse 15 that when the phrase was used before, it said set your face to enter Egypt. So it's actually talking about the same thing in verse 17. It says he will, you could read it like this. In fact, Uriah Smith, when he's commenting, he went back into the original Hebrew and he said it actually reads, the verse actually reads like this. And I'll read what he says. He shall also set his face to enter by force the whole kingdom. So he shall also set his face to enter by force the whole kingdom. So if I turn the words around, you might understand it more with today's English. So King James is always speaking today's English. So you might say today, he shall also set his face to enter the whole kingdom by his force. Does that make sense? So the king of the north, after taking Jerusalem, is now setting his face to enter Egypt with all of his strength. And that's what he'd always wanted to do from the beginning. He's been trying to conquer the king of the south. So now we know what that part of the verse says. Where in Daniel 11 at the end do you see the king of the north entering Egypt? Do we see it after verse 41? Is he going to Egypt? Can someone read the verses where he goes into Egypt? After verse 41, how does the king of the north interact with Egypt? Shall I read it? Yeah.
He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the country, and the land of Egypt shall not escape.
Thank you. Oh yeah, that's okay for now. Thanks. So in verse 42 it says he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So here you see the same also in verse 17. He's saying he's doing something also after he's stood in the glorious land, and after he's consumed it, he's now also going to try and take Egypt. So you see that in verse 42 as well as in verse 17. His face onto the isles, and he takes many. And what he did was after he went into Egypt, he then took Libya, which was next to it, and then he also took Ethiopia, which was just below it. So he took Egypt and he took the countries that were next to it. And what does verse 43 say in Daniel 11? It says, So it says the Libyans and the Ethiopians would be at his steps. So this actually happened back in history in verse 17 and 18. He takes Egypt, and then the Libyans and the Ethiopians are at his steps. We'll go on to verse 19.
So it says in verse 19, then shall he turn his face. So his face must have been facing one way, which is where he was in seeking Egypt. But then he's going to turn his face, and he's going to face a different way. But it says which way? Toward the, what does it say? Toward the fort of his own land. Where's his own land? Where's he from? This was Julius Caesar, by the way. I know we've not said it yet. This is Julius Caesar from verse 17, 18. When you go back into history, he's the one who comes down into Egypt. He's the one who conquers Egypt. That's the story as well with Cleopatra. She's the one who stands on his side, but then turns against him, betrays him. That's the latter part of verse 17. But this is Julius Caesar. And in verse 19, he goes back. He's not from Egypt, Julius Caesar. He's from Rome. So he goes back up, turns his face toward the fort of his own land, goes back to his own land, goes back up north. And as he goes back home, what does it say? What does it go on to say? He says, he shall stumble and fall. Anyone know the history of how Julius Caesar stumbled and fell? When he went back, this was, by the way, he took Egypt. I don't know where. That's the right hand. I'm just going to write it. Okay. In 47 BC. So in verse 17, when he goes with the strength of his whole kingdom, we're in 47 BC. So we've gone down in history quite some way. Julius Caesar takes Egypt. So Greece lasts a long time. The southern part of Greece up until then was still the Grecian kingdom of Glass. But then in 47 BC, Julius Caesar at least begins to end Egypt, the Grecian Egypt, and he then goes back home, and because he travelled around on his tour, his victory tour with Cleopatra, and they were worshipped as gods and many other things. But when he goes back home, this is now 44 BC, and the news has spread, and he's going to be made. Anyone know what they tried to do when he went home? Anyone at the back?
Assassinate him? Did they try to assassinate him?
Before that?
They tried to make him sort of a dictator, so there was no voting in the...
Tried to crown him king. And for the first time, remember this had been a republic Rome, but now he saw his ambition was to be the head of the head of the head, and he wanted to be made king, which would overturn all the principles of the Roman Republic. And I think there's a particular story where, what was his name? Is it Mark Antony or Mark Antony, which was one of his generals at the time, when he returned to test the people, and I think this is the latter part of verse 18, but I'm not going to go into it. He was publicly, a crown was brought, and Mark Antony took the crown and he went to place it on. He called a big festival where all the people came out in the streets, basically most of the whole town, everyone came. And he wanted to see what the reaction of the people, because this had never been done before. This was crazy in comparison with the Roman Republic principles. And he lifted the crown and he put it above Julius Caesar's head. And before they did that, all the crowd were going crazy and roaring and, we love you, Caesar. And they went to put the crown in his head and everyone went silent. And so Caesar said, I'm like, stop. And then the crowd started cheering again and screaming and shouting and rejoicing. And it's okay. And so they went to try and put the crown on his head again. Mark Antony went to put it on and everyone went quiet. So you could see this happened 3 times. That even the people were not for it. But somehow, some way, the Senate decided to make him the sole ruler, dictator, king. And it was about a group of 23 people. And the same day that they made him king, the same 23 people turned on him and killed him, stabbed him to death. And it's interesting because that same day, at night, Julius Caesar's wife had a dream. And in the dream, she was told to tell Caesar not to go to that meeting.
God was trying to
And God in his mercy was trying to save him. And Julius Caesar brushed it off, as some husbands sometimes brush off what their wives say.
It was Cleopatra that warned him.
Sorry?
Cleopatra warned him not to go. It was Cleopatra warned Julius not
Okay,
to go. Yeah.
was she the one who had the dream there?
It came from her.
Okay,
From her.
well, I think they weren't quite married, but
Yeah.
they were in a
She was
relationship
she was
since the
mistress,
victory of the Southern Kingdom. But God never just warns us once. Then as he was on his way to the meeting, he was told by one of his close associates, I've got a feeling something's not going to be right, don't go to the meeting. But he was persuaded by one of those who betrayed him to go anyway, and he went. And the same people that put him on the throne, the same people that killed him. And he stumbled and fell, and he was not found, he died.
Just because they wanted to know what the reaction of the people would be.
And when we get to verse 44 and 45, isn't it interesting? It doesn't say in verse 45, it doesn't say he shall plant his tabernacles in the seas, in the glorious holy mountain. What does it mean when he plant your tabernacles?
Church state.
Sorry? What's a tabernacle?
Church. Palaces state.
Tabernacles of his
Palace.
palace. What do you do in a palace? Who?
Civil.
It's a king. He's a king.
King.
That's when he's at his height. He's taken Egypt. He's at his height. He's taken the whole world, which is what Egypt represents at the end of the world. And just as Caesar was made king, and he's at his pinnacle, and he sits on his throne, and the same people who put him on his throne do what? Kill him. And in Revelation 17, verse 16, the same people who put the papacy on the throne, which is the 10 kings, what do?
When there's when the
Burning.
divine wrath,
Turn.
they turn.
On her, eat her flesh and bring her to destruction. So the same people that helped the both king of the norths are the same those who were made king, supreme ruler. It lasts for a moment. I think it was the day he was inaugurated king. It's the day he died. It didn't even take one full day of that kingship. And so too at the end of the world, God's not going to allow that period to last long. It's going to be but a short time. And we see here again, now we're in verse 19 and verse 14.
So that takes us all the way to 44 and 45. What happens after the king of the north goes down? After he's not found in verse 19? And after he comes to his end in verse 45? What's the next verse? In each of these. So in Daniel 11, that's the end of Daniel 11, the next verse says, at that time shall Michael stand up. Who's Michael?
Jesus.
Jesus. So after, I'll just put it here, on the same point. You see Jesus. Michael standing up. And whenever one kingdom was brought to an end, God always introduces the next kingdom. So now you have Michael, and he stands up. Michael stands up. Look at my pen. Can I borrow your pen? Thank you. And Michael stands up. And what happens after verse 19, when Rome has now fully taken all of Greece, and Julius Caesar dies? What happens after in verse 20?
Should stand up. Stand up a vile person.
Trump.
Verse 20?
Stand up in his estate.
Who's the raiser of taxes in verse 20?
Obama.
Who's the raiser of taxes? That's Augustus Caesar. And you see that in Luke chapter 2, verse 1. And when he stood up as a raiser of taxes, and he made this decree that all the world should be taxed in Luke chapter 2. What was this decree for? Well, it was a decree for taxes, and it was actually to bring Jesus, the mother of Christ, to Bethlehem. That's why God allowed this to happen, so that Jesus would then come on the scene. So you have Rome taking over Greece. They finish taking Greece, and then you have the history of Jesus beginning in verse 20.
So in Luke chapter 2 verse 1, which introduces this raiser of taxes, Caesar Augustus, if you drop down a few verses later, I think it's by verse 7, you see it talks about the birth of Christ.
Yeah.
So in both histories we've got a line of events. Here we've got a line of events that transpire, that take place all the way up until when Christ comes the first time. And then here in this history, from Daniel 11 verse 40 to Daniel 12:1, you've got a line of successive events that transpire or take place all the way up until when Christ comes. But now for the second time. The first time, the kingdom of grace, and the second time, the kingdom of glory. And so that brings us on to our next point, which is this. Very practical point is this is a line of prophetic events pointing to Christ. In both lines of history, these lines lead up, these events lead up to the coming of Christ. And by missing the events that lead up to it, who are you going to miss?
Christ.
You're going to miss Christ. People say Christ, Christ, but if you don't follow the line of events leading up to it, how can you arrive at it? In both instances, how can you arrive at Christ? By not following these lines of events.
I'm going to read a quote for you from Voice in Speech and Song. It's page 325, paragraph 2. On that note, it says, no one can be excusable who says, I will no longer have anything to do with these special messages. Talking about the angel's messages, the gospel.
These messages.
I will preach Christ. So I'll read that again. It says, no one can be excusable who says, I will no longer have anything to do with these special messages. I will preach Christ. It goes on to say, no one can preach Christ and present the truth as it is in Jesus unless he presents the truths that are to come before the people at the present time when such important developments are taking place. So no one can preach Christ and present the truth unless he presents the truths that are to come before the people when important developments are taking place.
Amen. So here it's impossible.
Who's that?
Voice in Speech and Song, that's Ellen White, in page 325.2. And the summary of that statement that she says is basically, you can say I'm preaching Christ, but if you're not following the line of events which show the important developments, then you'll miss Christ. So you can't have one without the other. Sometimes people try and separate them, and they are one. So, second point is a statement found in 30 manuscript releases, 394, I believe it's paragraph 1. You have that statement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the prophecy in the 11th chapter of Daniel has nearly reached its complete fulfillment. Much of the history that has taken place in fulfillment of this prophecy will be repeated.
Okay, so many have read this statement, and it goes on to describe specifically how verses 30 to 36 repeat, and that's correct. But here, in the paragraph or the sentence before, she says, much of the history spoken of. And in the sentence before, she says in this chapter, or in Daniel 11, in the previous sentence it says the 11th chapter of Daniel. So when she's telling us what repeats, much of the history that has taken place will be repeated, she's talking about the 11th chapter of Daniel. And here we've just saw from all the way from verses 5 And now we're down in verse 20. That's more than 15 verses. We've seen this history has repeated line upon line. And it's so plain that you can't wrest it out of that line. God has just illustrated the end from the beginning. And why does he tell us the beginning? So that we know what's to come to take place at the end. So that we won't miss Christ and Christ lifted.
Let's make a point about Christ's first coming. At Christ's first coming, who did the angel go to first? After he'd already been born. Yes?
Shepherds.
The shepherds on the hill. And what were they doing on that hill?
Studying.
They were studying prophecy. You can read that in Desire of Ages. Now, when Jesus was then dedicated in the temple, who recognized that this was Christ? Do you remember their names?
The old guy and the old woman.
Simeon.
Simeon and Anna.
Anna.
Simeon and Anna, they both recognized. Now, were they studying?
Yeah.
Yes.
They were studying. You can read that in Desire of Ages. They were studying the prophetic word. Desire of Ages 5:5 says, "These humble worshippers, Simeon and Anna, had not studied the prophecies in vain." So isn't it amazing how they could not have known of themselves that this was Christ? And in fact, they had to wait for God had to just tell Simeon when he was in the temple, this is Christ. He couldn't read that one in Scripture. He couldn't read in Scripture this particular baby. God had to tell him, but God only told him and revealed that to him because he was studying the prophecies. So David had not studied it in vain. Gabriel only came to the shepherds because they were studying to know. And that's how God works. He asks us to put in all of our effort and do everything we can on our side. And then he does for us what we can't do for ourselves. So we'll study and we'll try and find, and he will reveal to us in the right timing whatever we need to know. But we need to put our effort into it, into learning and studying. And it shows God that we do care, that we are interested. And he just does his part. Maybe one more example of someone who's studying prophecy, who I found out recently, was, remember the woman at the well? Did you know she was studying the prophecies? I read this in Desire of Ages. She was at the well. She was one of the first people that Jesus told, I am the Messiah. And Desire of Ages comments, and it says because she was studying the prophecies and she was searching. That's why she said to Jesus, we know that when Messiah is coming, he will tell us all things. She was studying the prophecies. And that's what God does. He will reveal light and truth to us when we apply ourselves to his words. Okay?
So, in summary, we've seen that verses 10, which we dealt with today, to verses 20, in three main parts, parallel with verses 40 to Daniel 12:1. And the first is when the king of the north overflows and passes through, and also again the king of the north overflows and passes over, same original word. Second is when king of the north enters into the glorious land, which is where God's people are, or the capital of God's people, because they were scattered at one point, but Jerusalem still remained the glorious land at that time. And same too, the capital of where God's church is today would therefore be the glorious land, which is the United States of America. That's where the Advent movement takes place. That's where God raised up the movement and his church and his prophet. And though his people are scattered today, yet God always has a land, as he did before, he has now. And that would be when the papacy passes the Sunday law in America. So we see the two issues of the Sabbath at this way mark. And then we saw that the last thing, the third and final thing that the king of the north did was take Egypt, which in that time was like the cherry on the top. That's what he had been yearning and coveted and desiring all the way through the verses. He just wanted Egypt. And now he's finally got it. And in Revelation 13 it tells us that the papacy says all the world wandered after the beast. The papacy really wants the whole world to be Catholicism and embrace it. And When it stretches forth his hand upon Egypt, the application at the end of the world of Egypt is the whole world. So here we see, shortly after that, Christ comes, and then we see Christ comes. This one the first time, this one the second time. So on the testimony of, I should say, the several in here, it's not just 3, even though I've lined them up on 3 waymarks, and the ones we saw before, which was at least 2 or 3, we've got now 7 or 8 testimonies confirming that the history of Greece parallels the history at the time of the end from 1989. And I'm going to put Sunday law here, and then I'm going to put close of probation eventually when he takes Egypt, and then Michael stands up. And so I'm going to put here, these verses, it covers all of this history. Now, question is, has the Sunday law been passed yet?
No.
But isn't that the midnight?
Have we
midnight
passed
cry?
1989?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So what do we need to know about? We need to know about what happens in between verse 40, part B, and verse 41, which is when the Sunday law is passed. Is there any verses in between verses 40 to 41 to tell us about that? In Daniel 11 verse 40 to 41, is there any verses in between? No. So here at the end it's silent, but doesn't tell us what's to take place.
Verse
Just
30 to
give me a
36.
moment. But verse 10 and verse 16, which also parallel these two, is there any verses in between verse 10 and verse 16?
Yeah.
Yes. So in our next presentation, we're going to be looking at the information and the verses provided between verse 10 and 16 to help us understand what's going to take place between verse 40 and 41. Is it your desire to seek a deeper understanding of Christ's fruit? In the cross, be my glory ever, till my raptured soul shall find rest beyond the river. Dear Father in heaven, we know that all of these lines of offense point to you. But if we miss these events, we will miss you. And the first chosen people missed you. Help us not to repeat that same mistake, O Lord. Help us to seek you and search you through diligent study of your word. And help us, Lord, to understand, for you said the wise shall understand. Guide us and keep us, we pray, as we recommit ourselves to you in the name of Jesus and prepare for the coming Sabbath. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.